Hi, I'm Michael Fields. Welcome to this edition of The Media. We've all heard about the terrible tragedy in Charleston. Now we're going to hear about a group of App State students who went behind the curtain to become eyewitnesses to media coverage of this event. Please meet Heather Page Preston, Dr. Frank Aycock, and Dr. David Spiceland, all of App State's Department of Communication. They switched seats on me, so that's why I paused there for a minute. You are the professor who took a group of your students, the course was broadcast news writing, I believe, a couple of weeks ago, to a scheduled visit to WBTV in Charlotte. You do this all the time. Tell us, as you were pulling up and as you were arriving, what you saw, your observations, and your observation of your students' observations.
Well, there were 3 students in the class, and they're always anticipating what will this be like. And I have to give a shout out to John Carter, who's one of our graduates, who is always very helpful in terms of letting us visit. I believe in reality. I believe teaching students what is out there, what should be there is nice as well. But I don't play games with them. I don't give them a fantasy world. So I feel like going to a place like Channel 3 is a good way to introduce them to what the media looks like. So, and boy, I wish I had a half hour to walk through all
You
of
have.
this. I know, but no.
Go to it.
One of the things I told the students is there is a difference when you would visit a television station 10, 20 years ago where you didn't have security, didn't have to wear a badge. I went in the White House to a press briefing back in '76 and walked in the front gate. The guy looked at my briefcase, did something like this and said, "You're okay, go on in." Of course, things have changed quite a bit at the White House.
So have they at WBTV.
Well, and everywhere, yeah. When they said 9/11 will not change us, that wasn't true. So that's an interesting little tidbit that I think students have to realize. And when they are in the media, the security will also be very tight. Well, we got there and John greeted us, and I expected that I could show them the setup, the way a newscast would be. We would watch the new newscast. And about 11 o'clock, John took us back to his desk and said, "Okay, let's do, if you'd sit down, I'm going to do a break." And at some point, and somebody walked up and said, "They got him," the shooter in Charleston. I don't even want to mention his name. I mean, he irritates me so much, obviously.
The shooter.
The shooter. Yeah, not John, but the shooter. So John jumped up, which is one of the things that students need to realize, especially in the news business, is you don't walk. You do a lot of running. You do, especially well, not just broadcast, but I think also print media, especially now with the internet. There is an extreme urgency to do things, to do it quickly. So he jumped up and we ran after him. And he was on the set. What had happened was that he was told that the shooter had been caught in Shelby, which is not too far from Charleston. So it was interesting, and I think the students picked up on this, trying to get information, trying to find out what we knew, trying to be reliable with the sources that we had. There were a lot of things that we heard that John could not put on the air until there was some sort of a confirmation.
Can you think of one of those examples?
Well, one of them was whether or not there was a picture or, because we didn't have any real-time kinds of things coming from Shelby at that point. The interesting thing, in addition to all that, was social media. While I've sat here, my phone has a couple of times, and it irritates other people when I pull it out and I want to see what the news, some sort of a something from USA Today or whatever, a bulletin, and you saw that with they had up at the front 2 iPads. I'm not sure why 2, but they had 2 iPads and a third tablet, which I'm not sure what that was all about. And while he was doing this, he was Twittering. And he told me later, he said, you know, I have to Twitter now. So there's a pressure on the media to have the information not just on air, but also in these social media kinds of situations. And the new news just went bye-bye. I mean, the whole thing for several hours was trying to figure out what the story was, whether or not indeed he had been captured. And then they had the helicopter, Channel 3 has a helicopter, and they were showing the car being towed away, which is kind of interesting.
The killer's car, the
Yeah,
suspect's
exactly.
car.
Yeah. In fact, we talked about that. Before all this happened, we talked about the difference in identifying somebody as a suspect, and he had some and
Or
I don't.
the alleged.
Well, and the word alleged will not save your bacon, if I can say that on the air.
Bacon's not a bad word.
I know, but I'm just trying to be very careful here.
Unless your cholesterol's high.
Yeah, you saw all these things going on and having to think very quickly on their feet, being on the air. The weather people were very helpful. They were off to the side, and they brought up some maps. I'm a big believer in geography and how geography really figures into dissemination of news.
So, excuse me, let me break in for a minute. They brought up weather maps, but didn't use them for weather.
Exactly.
Used them for geography.
Right, to show the
geography, weather
relationship.
of Shelby to Charlotte and so
Well,
forth.
and also the question as far as what the distance was from Charleston to Shelby. And what was interesting was that he had gone through Charlotte, apparently. And in fact, this was one of the things that he had to hold off on. Apparently, the killer had used an ATM machine not too far from where we were located. But he said, well, how do we know that? And at that point, it wasn't really something that they could go with. But later it turned out that the guy had been very near where we were.
At WBTV.
Right.
Now, let me just ask you something else, and then somebody else take over the questioning here. You're our subject, you see, and we're going to all question you. But did you notice that it helped Channel 3 in their coverage, the fact that they are owned by Raycom, and Raycom also owns the CBS affiliate in Charleston? Was there any of that?
I didn't see that.
Okay.
As I recall.
Because you would have thought that would have given them quite a leg up.
Well, there were some feeds from Charleston, but they tended to be CBS,
From the network.
CBS affiliate, or well, the CBS affiliate.
But
there.
they came in via CBS.
Right,
Okay.
right. So there's a lot of sort of backdoor
Okay.
kinds of covering the story.
Dave, one thing I find that's fascinating by what you said is, here you have a crisis situation in a sense. And all of a sudden, these different groups, news and weather, which are usually at opposite ends, except for tornadoes, thunderstorms, all of that. Here the weather people jumped in and said, hey, we can add to the news. And the news people said, yes, thank you, this would be a big help. You know, that is a sign of teamwork that you don't see too much anymore these days.
Well, the teamwork, sometimes if you've got sports and you've got news and you've got the weather people, my experience at an affiliate is they tend to be more cooperative. Where you have problems is at the network level, where you've got the news division and then you've got the sports division. You know, there's that famous thing with Dan Rather and the tennis game that went over,
yes.
and so he just kind of walked off the set, which haunted him, I think, even to this day. So you've got, I think, more at the network level, a lot of disparaging or differences between divisions. I didn't see it, but there could be something that is not stated.
They're all under in an affiliate like that, they're all under the news director, and they're thrilled to take a part of the story. And the fact is, if there's anyone today who has wonderful mapping capability, it's the weather.
Yeah.
You know, the weather
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
What do you jump
Oh,
in?
yeah, I'm dying to ask some questions. Obviously, this was not your average visit. The atmosphere was very different. And one of the things that's really fascinating about being in a newsroom, any sort of newsroom, when something like this happens, is this immediate grasping for information but not being able to do anything with it. It's frustrating and exhilarating all at the same time. And I'm curious what your students thought about that process. They live in a world where information goes out unvetted on social media all of the time. Well, did they ask questions? Why can't you use this? How much opportunity did they get to participate, and what
Yeah.
were their observations?
What I noticed was that John was very open to us.
John Carter.
John Carter, yeah. When they would go to a break or they were off mic, and of course you can tell if they're off mic because you can hear the audio. And he would yell to us and say, if you've got any questions, let us know. There were people in the studio who were very helpful. I got the attitude, and I'm not trying to trumpet Channel 3 because I've had some affiliation with the other stations there in Charlotte. But they were very friendly. It wasn't a sense of, get away little boy, you bother me, which I wanted them to see that. I think in the media, it's always good when they get into the media that they don't forget the people who represent the viewers, which would be us. And the students were asking some questions. I think they were kind of overwhelmed in some ways initially, but they were good troopers and they were watching, and I wandered around the studio. In fact, there was a guy who came in and had a little camera on a, I need to put this down, I guess, just in case it buzzes. But he had a little computer with the ability to record audio and video. And both the John and the co-anchor, he got a little clip from them in terms of prayers for Charleston or whatever, and immediately went over and put it on their Facebook page. And I asked him, I said, do you mind if I wander over there and see how you do it? And he said, sure. I mean, they were very helpful. And I went over there, and it's sort of chaos is probably unfair, but they're pulling all this stuff together to put on their Facebook page, to do some Twittering. And that's the name of the game today, is the social media that goes with
Yeah.
it.
But Heather asked, I guess, let me paraphrase it
Yeah,
for
sure.
a second. Here they are, your students and you, watching an on-the-air crisis situation, somebody using social media to release information that they can't use on the air because it hasn't been sourced yet.
Hasn't been vetted, yeah.
Yes, that's sort of, how did your students react to that? Did they see that?
I don't think they saw it. I was able to view a little bit of it. I didn't get the sense that they were doing things on social media that they couldn't air. I got the feeling that everything was, if you talk about a gatekeeper, that the gatekeeper was still the on-air presence. That's the impression that I got.
Was it more the humanistic aspect of social media? Like you said, prayers for Charleston. It's not news in
Yeah,
that
it was
sense, yeah.
pictures. It was trying to make it more visual. And one of the things that irritates me is breaking news. And in fact, John and I had talked about this before, and everything now is breaking news. And if you've got something, a story that happened the day before, it's not breaking news. And I think that's a phrase that
Beaten to
the
death.
media overuses.
Let me just ask you, because we're running, believe it or not, out of time.
I told you.
Yes, yes. How do you think this whole event, Charleston, the whole event, and its coverage, have impacted the state of South Carolina, the nation? I mean, we're talking about the flag, Governor Haley, who heretofore has been sort of a Southern Maggie Thatcher. She's a very, very, I mean, she projects a very, very hard, matter-of-fact sort of presence. She was virtually in tears during much of this. And now she's, of course, very, very supportive of removing the flag. The president's eulogy. Did the coverage, how did this thing, this tragedy, why was it treated differently and received differently by the public than Baltimore, than Ferguson? We're talking about loss of innocent, presumably innocent, African-American lives. This was different somehow. This actually had a decent end result. What was the difference? Did the coverage have anything to do with that, or was it just simply the victims' families saying, I forgive you?
Well, it was in a church.
Yeah.
But we're
And-
seeing black churches being burnt down 6, 7 a week in the
Well,
South now.
that's another issue that there are some, I've been following that somewhat as well, and there's been lightning strikes that have caused some of the damage. So
No.
I'm just saying that's something that we need to keep our eye on.
Okay, yeah.
But as far as Christianity and being in that situation, a Judeo-Christian ethic of forgiveness or whatever. To be honest, and I'm a Christian myself, but I just got to hand it to people who can say, I forgive you. If it were me, I don't know what I would do. I know what I would like to do, but to have that kind of attitude,
Do you think that was the significant
I
difference?
think Dave is right, that context is everything, that the killings happened in a church. They did not happen on a street or in the back of a police van or somewhere else, which changes the discussion completely based on biases that we have in society.
And the police was not involved directly with the shooting.
That's right.
That's correct. That's
Yeah.
a
You had
very
a,
big
you had a
factor.
lone gunman who we will likely find out is mentally ill. And, you know, likely, we don't know for certain, but likely.
That's
I mean,
always the story
but-
that shows up in the
but-
media when it's a white male.
Well, I think you would find it on
This
any
guy
type of
does
situation.
sound.
He may indeed be.
Yeah, he's unquestionably filled with hate and rage.
Yes.
Whether he is mentally ill or not, or this is just a manifestation of that, I don't know. But
I'm not sure anybody's in the right mind when they go walk in a church sitting there
And
for
sit there
a
for an
while.
hour.
Yeah, and then pull out a gun and shoot 9 people.
I hear you. I heard someone on the air compare this to the Birmingham church bombing, in which I think 4 little girls.
I think President
were
Obama
killed.
made that comparison.
That was, of course, add to the list of different circumstances.
Yes.
This was in a church, not in the street. The police weren't involved and so forth. This is 2015 and not, what was it,
64.
64. So maybe we weren't ready yet to, as a society, to learn a lesson from some tragedy like this, and perhaps maybe we've come further than I was willing to believe a couple of weeks ago. It would be nice to see something positive coming out of this, and if the only positive thing is the removal of a symbol that deeply offends about a fourth or a third of South Carolina's population, that would be a good thing too. How much time do we have left on this wonderful episode? Because if we have lots of time left. All right, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Back to the WBTV adventure. Coming back in the car, I wish I had been a bug on your windshield. Then I wouldn't have been able to hear anything. What was the conversation like?
Now, keep in mind, I've got 3 students. 2 of them had come to Charlotte early and left after we had left, me and one of the students. So it was just me and a student in the car going back. The next day in class, we talked about it. Actually, it was Thursday, so we talked about it on Monday. And we spent some time getting reaction. I wanted to know what they thought. And they were, I think they realized the significance of being in a setting to where this news is happening very quickly. And I've always enjoyed, in fact, I've been interested in something called diffusion of information, how information moves through society, particularly in the media. I've seen instances where it's worked well. I've seen instances where it hasn't worked all that well. I remember when Reagan was shot, and we were watching, this is 81, and the famous scene with Frank Reynolds where he announced that Brady had died, and you hear this it's eulogy, and then all of a sudden somebody hands him something. He says, "What?" And he says it appears that he's not, and he starts pounding the table, and he says, "I need information. I need it right now."
I do remember that now
Yeah.
that you mention it.
Yeah, and I can sense his frustration, especially where he's, like I said, given his eulogy on the air. And there also is, from somewhat a legal standpoint, we're given a little bit more slack legally when things are happening that quickly. But still, I think there's a responsibility, this is personally, I think this, that the media has to be careful that they don't say something that may not necessarily be true or may be questionable. And I mean, even still with the shooting 2 weeks ago in a day or whatever, there's a lot of things we don't know that's come out.
Again, but on the way back and on that Monday following in class, does anything stick out in your mind as saying, wow, these students, these three kids, will never forget this trip to the television
Oh,
station?
yeah, yeah. I think that they were expecting, because I tried to give them okay, here's what the newscast will look like. For instance, one of the things that people don't realize is television stations are legally required to have somebody who does the texting,
Closed caption.
the closed caption texting. And this is the interesting thing at Channel 3, and it's not unusual. The person who does the closed captioning is in Chicago. And she, and I was told it was a she, is doing this while and even breaking news stories. They have to allow her to be able to monitor whatever, to do the closed captioning.
This is the Americans for Disability Act.
Well, and plus, yeah, there's a lot of things that are, where the requirement by the FCC and in Congress as well. So, yeah, there were some interesting kind of behind the scenes things that happened because we got the tour before all this happened. And John told us, if there's a breaking news story that they still have to do all this. And indeed, that was going on while all this was happening.
Let me ask you, well, again, all of us, thank you, by the way. We were here while you were there. And having one of these chats and seeing your empty chair because you called us and said, don't count on my being home in time for the show.
I didn't want to break speed limits to get here.
And we didn't want
Yeah.
you to either. What is the media's role what's the role we should be playing in America's processing of the race issue? The main race issue, which I think probably boils down into its most basic in acceptance. And that sounds very patronizing, I know. But that we somehow, what is our responsibility? What can we be expected to do to get us past some of this? It seems to be getting better, but not quickly enough. Look how quickly we as a society came to terms with gay marriage, and it was almost lightning speed. Why can't we get through this, and what should the media be doing that it's not doing?
In all fairness, look at this panel. And we should be more transparent about that. We should be more upfront about it, not be uncomfortable to say, here we are, a bunch of white people talking about race, talking about things that affect African Americans in this country. And it doesn't matter how close you are to anyone in your life, how many friends you have, whether or not you're married to someone. What matters is that you don't have the insights that African Americans do being in this society. You can intellectually understand it, but you don't live it. And we live somewhere in Boone where it's difficult to get diversity on a panel such as this, if we're pulling from university members. That's a legitimate component of producing what people see. I think being upfront and talking about that gets rid of the uncomfortable nature of it. You're afraid you're going to step on somebody's toes. I have no problem saying that I don't know what it's like to be black, right? Just like you have no problem saying you don't know what it's like to be a woman. It's different. It's different. And so just talk about it. That's part of it. I think we need to cover it. I've got a friend who was totally amazed that the stories about the churches burning in South and North Carolina were true until she saw Bill Moyer's report. She thought it was an urban myth that people were passing around because of social media's role of propagating untrue stories, and people were just jumping on the hate bandwagon, quote unquote. And it shocked me to see her write that and post it on social media, that she finally accepted it. So, maybe if we have a lesson to learn from that more and bigger institutions in the media need to cover these stories more frequently.
Managers, for instance, managing editors and things,
Yeah.
so that you may be an African American reporter in the field, but the person who assigns you to cover a story and the person who edits the story as it's coming in, and the hierarchy that you play to because you know this is the way my company or my organization wants this story covered, all play into that. And until there are more African Americans, more Asians, more Hispanics, all
Representation.
along that
Yes.
management ladder, that's what it takes. That's pretty much what you're saying.
Yes.
But I would go even further. You're talking about the time frame. I've got two sons, 27, 20, just turned 25, okay? Yeah, it's not a survey, but I can tell you both of them have much different viewpoints, much more accepting viewpoints. You know, the coming generation out there is much more colorblind overall, at least from what I've been able to see being around. My
We
older
have about
son.
30 seconds.
Okay, my older son works for a corporation. He's at a mid-management level. Most of his people are either African American or a few Hispanics, very few whites working in the company. He has no problems dealing with it. My younger son has a black roommate in the apartment that he's been living in for the last 2 years. They get along well. He thinks nothing about it. You know, there's no difference as far as he's concerned. I think that part of the problem as we're looking at, we're discussing this, is our ages, not
And
so
yet-
much them.
Yet, the guy from Charleston is what, 20, 21, something like that?
Yes,
But
but you
again,
have
we've
the
already written
fringe.
him off as being insane, so. Anyway, that's it. That's all the time we have. This was fascinating. Thank you, David, for this field report. That's our program. Thanks for watching. We'd like to hear from you, and you can reach us with your comments and suggestions at watchapptv.com. Until next time, I'm Michael Fields.